some of you are aware that we do a lot of traveling around. And so just as a recommendation, we went to Steubenville yesterday to see the Nutcrackers. They have Nutcrackers all over the town. And it's really worthwhile going to. It's just a lot of different things that you never would imagine
They're life size.
a Nutcracker could be.
Life size.
The life size, yeah. Plus, there's a shop there that sells Nutcrackers. Connection, yes.
Well, they do.
They're the ones that started it.
They make them.
They make them. So it's interesting. Place. So if you're looking for someplace to go, short trip, there's a suggestion for you.
So we can put in the plug, right, Frank?
What's that?
Your,
Yes, we had the Nutcracker show last week and it was really nice. My goddaughter was in there, my cousins.
Yeah.
She was the snap me, princess or whatever they call it. I had to keep nudging my wife. I'm like, which character is this one? So you Sugar Plum Fairy or whatever. But it was a good show.
Lots of interesting stuff going on, especially this time of year. Different ways to celebrate. And we are celebrating the Gospel of Luke. That is, we're celebrating in that Luke has written the gospel for us, telling us of the life of Jesus. And although there are many similarities to the other gospels, there are also some differences and certainly different perspectives. So we're in the gospel according to Luke chapter 9. And we are beginning today with verse 10. And I think we probably, yeah, we can just start with 10. We may refer back to the previous verses later. I'm calling this the occasion of a great miracle. In the actually, I don't know why I put 10 and 11. It really goes beyond that. First of all, the debriefing and recuperation. So verse 10, when the apostles returned. Now, remember, he had sent them out. He had sent the 12 out, had given them the power to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal diseases. And so when they come back, just like anybody who's sent out, you come back, you give a report. And that's what they're going to do. I'm calling a debriefing. When the apostles returned, they gave an account to him of all they had done. Now, they're called apostles here. Luke calls them apostles. And you remember the difference between a disciple and an apostle. What's it? Because they're called disciples before. What's the difference between a disciple and an apostle? I'm sorry, if you all speak at once, all filter out.
We're all disciples.
What does that mean? You haven't defined it, Frank. You just.
I know it's banging around in there somewhere, but I can't bring it out. But we're all disciples. We're not all apostles.
Why?
They were specifically called followers of Christ.
Okay, but what's the difference? Because I would contend, in a sense, we're apostles,
Okay.
small a apostles.
Yes.
When we understand the difference between the two words.
I always think of disciples as a learner.
Uh-huh.
You learn, you're taught, you disciple. Okay, so it's, apostle, I think, is more of an office of an ambassador, is a position of someone being sent out and sent
Right.
to represent.
So quite simply, a disciple is a learner, and an apostle is someone who is sent. That's what the word means, to be sent. And we talked about it as like an ambassador or emissary, something like that. So these guys were apostles because having been with Jesus for some time and learned from him, and not only learned information, but learned how to communicate, how to be compassionate. He sent them out to try to do what they had been learning. And so they get back. They had left as disciples or learners, and they returned as apostles by the words that Luke uses here, or sent ones. And so they gave an account. They told the narrative of everything they had done. So this was a time of debriefing. You know, it is important for those involved in ministry to have an opportunity to report back what was done. That's what we do when the missionaries come and tell us what's been going on in the mission field. That's why it's important for that to happen on a personal basis periodically. And we see that happening later on in the book of Acts with Paul and his missionary journeys. He comes back to Antioch where he began and tells them everything that had occurred. The next thing we see in Luke's account is this, taking them with him. So Jesus taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a city called Bethsaida. Now, it says he took them with him, and we don't really know for certain whether that means that they were going by foot or whether they were going in a boat. Logically, it would seem, if you look at the map here, going from Capernaum to Bethsaida, and understanding that this dotted line here indicates where the shoreline used to be, that going from Capernaum to Bethsaida, it would have been a relatively quick thing to do to go by boat. And we know that Jesus and his disciples used a boat quite often. So that certainly would be the most logical conclusion, it seems to me. Edersheim, that great Jewish historian, points out that it almost seems as if the departure of Jesus from Capernaum marked a crisis in the history of that town. From henceforth, it ceases to be the center of his activity and is only occasionally and in passing visited. Indeed, the concentration and growing power of Pharisaic opposition and the proximity of Herod's residence at Tiberias would have rendered a permanent stay there impossible at this stage in our Lord's history. Henceforth, his life is indeed not purely missionary, but he has no certain dwelling place. So up until this time, Capernaum has been his home base. But now he's leaving Capernaum, apparently not to return except occasionally. He says he withdrew by himself. There may be a fourfold rationale for this getaway. First of all, a continued debriefing and evaluation of the apostles' first attempt at ministry. So you can understand that initially as they get back to him, they're telling him stuff, but okay, let's go someplace quiet where we can all think about what has been accomplished and what was done. And so that may be one reason for this withdrawal, this getaway. A second reason for this time away by themselves is much needed recuperation for the disciples after the strenuousness of ministry. So, if you've ever been involved in any kind of traveling, you know that sometimes it takes some recuperation time. I know I feel that way after getting back from one of Beth's planned vacations. I need some time to rest now because she likes.
I rest during the vacation.
Well, if I have jet lag, yeah. She doesn't get jet lag, so she doesn't understand. But anyway, these guys have been on the road. They've been involved in ministry, so they need some time of rest. The third reason for getting away is the elimination of an easy movement of the people to move toward attempting an uprising against Herod Antipas, who had recently executed John the Baptist by enlisting the leadership of Jesus. In other words, Herod Antipas had incurred the anger of the people by executing John the Baptist. Well, their most likely or a likely scenario would be for them to turn to Jesus and say, "Come on, Jesus, let's go get him. Let's overthrow Herod Antipas and you become the king." And unless you think that outlandish, just wait a while. We'll get to a place where something like that actually occurs. And then fourthly, a temporary withdrawal from Herod Antipas's territory to avoid persecution. The idea being, if he just executed John the Baptist, he may come after Jesus next. Now we know from our previous study that Herod was inquiring about Jesus. So again, that's not too far-fetched either. And if you look at the map again, you'll see how close these two cities are, or villages, Capernaum and Bethsaida. But the dividing line between Herod Antipas's territory and that of Philip the Tetrarch is right there. So he's moving out of the territory that is ruled by Herod Antipas into a different territory. All right, any comments or questions about the rationale for this getaway for them?
I have a question, but Sea of Galilee, that dotted line shows where it used to be. I didn't realize it used to be that much bigger. Like the southern part,
Yeah, the southern part, yeah, especially. Yeah.
so it has.
It has filled in. Any other comments? As a way of application, J.C. Ryle addresses the issue of the need to get away from your place of employment and relax. Such inactivity is necessary for recharging and for reflection. and sometimes we may get away from our job, but we don't spend much time reflecting. You know, we get busy with something else. It's important for that to take place too. J.C. Ryle quotes a man that he calls Cecil, and I could not find out who that was. So I'm sorry I'm in the dark as to his identity, but he said this: if a man would seriously set himself to work, he must retire from the crowd. He must not live in a bustle. If he is always driving through the business of the day, he will be so in harness as not to observe the road he is going. And then again he says, I know not how it is that some Christians can make so little of recollection and retirement. He doesn't mean permanent retirement, he means just resting once in a while. I find the spirit of the world a strong assimilating principle. I find it hurrying away, if I mistyped that, either that or it's just hurrying away. Oh, okay. Sorry. I find it hurrying away minds in its wake and sinking men among the dregs and filth of a carnal nature. Even my ministerial employment would degenerate into a mere following of my trade and crying of my wares. I am obliged to withdraw myself regularly and say to my heart, what are you doing? Where are you? So some sage advice from Cecil. All right, so they're going to Bethsaida. Now, there are a number of villages that are named Bethsaida. So some scholars speculate as to which one this was. I think that most agree that it is on the location that I've indicated here on this map. The reason there are so many of them is because the word simply means fishing place. So there are a lot of fishing places along the Sea of Galilee, and this only occurs in Luke. As I said, it's just across the border from the domains of Antipas on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, not understanding that the side is a very small area. As you can notice also, it's on the eastern side of the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows down from the mountains into the Sea of Galilee and then exits again at the other end, heading toward the Dead Sea. Philip the Tetrarch had enlarged this village of Bethsaida into a city. And remember, Philip the Tetrarch was a brother of Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great, as we looked at the family tree last week, I believe it was. And he enlarged this village and then renamed it Julius after Augustus Caesar's daughter. Now, we know from John's gospel that this town is actually the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. And because of that, there's some speculation, I guess, as to really where was the home of Peter. In fact, I was just reading an article this morning in Biblical Archaeology Review, which delves into that. He is very much in favor of Bethsaida being the home of Simon Peter, says that the other references to Capernaum are misunderstandings, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, couldn't he have had two homes? You know, could he? I mean, all of you were probably born someplace other than where you live now, right? So you could talk about your home being where you grew up, but then you have another home now. And I suspect that's the way it was with Simon Peter. I don't think there's any reason to have a war over which was where his home was, because in both places, church buildings were built on top of what was the home of Simon Peter. So I think it's perfectly plausible to think that he was from both places in a sense. This area of Bethsaida, however, compared to Capernaum, is more sparsely inhabited, and so it was conducive for a much deserved break. All right, any comments or questions about the going away for a time of relaxation? The next verse begins with the word but. Remember what Burns said, the better laid plans of mice and men? I can't remember the rest of it, but I know it's bad. What is that?
Are apt to go agley. Agley, that's the way.
Agley?
Agley.
Are apt to go agley.
That's another word for straight.
The better laid plans of mice and men. Okay, so the plans for recuperation, relaxation are not to be realized, but it is a circumstantial opportunity, I'm calling it. Verse 11, but the crowds were aware of this and followed him. They saw where he was going. They could see, if he went by boat, as I'm presuming, they could see where the boat was heading. It's not that far. And so they apparently followed along the shore on land and went across the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee. John Gill mentioned something that I could not find anywhere else. He says that there was a footbridge here, and so that's why I wanted to include this map. It shows closer up. The water is here, and so they're falling from Capernaum, and I don't know whether it was probably across the Jordan River, which is there. There was apparently a footbridge that they could cross over to Bethsaida. And I get there pretty quickly. In fact, they may have even arrived before Jesus and the disciples. Crowds were aware of this, followed him. And then next we see that Jesus welcomes them. Now, that might be a bit surprising if you think about it, because here he is looking for a time of R&R with his disciples, and all of a sudden this big crowd of people shows up. He could have said, go home, I'll see you later, we have this retreat planned. You ever have that happen? You have something planned and somebody interrupts it with a ministry opportunity? Have you ever recognized that? You thought, oh man, I was planning on relaxing today, but so-and-so called and wants me to come over and help them with something. And in the back of your mind, you don't want to do it, but you figure you probably should. Or maybe it's just your wife wants to go shopping.
I knew that was coming.
Which happens almost on a daily occurrence at our house. Yeah.
Is that like the same thing as when my daughter calls me on her day off and it's supposed to be my day off too, and wants me to come and babysit?
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying we should always be taken advantage of. Sometimes there's a place, I suppose, for us to say no. But Jesus welcomes them, and what does he do? He sees this as an opportunity to continue to proclaim the gospel. He said, and he began speaking to them about the kingdom of God. Now, sometimes we get the idea because we have a lot of times where Jesus is going away by himself, but we shouldn't have the impression that he's constantly trying to get away from people. That's not the case at all. He does want to be with people, and he appears glad to see them. But notice what he sees this as an opportunity to do. It is to give them a message. And the primary message was of the gospel of the kingdom. The gospel of the kingdom. He's talking to them about the kingdom of God. Now, if you listen to many pastors and teachers throughout the various media today, that might seem odd. They tell us that the kingdom of God is today yet to be realized after these intervening 2,000 years. Doesn't it seem incongruous for Jesus to spend all of his homological energy, that is his speaking energy, on something that his hearers would not experience in their lifetimes? Of course, there are those who assert that Jesus was offering to rule Israel as king, but in their rejection of him, the kingdom was postponed. But we will notice that after the next event, the crowds want to crown Jesus, but he refuses. It only seems logical that the kingdom that Jesus offers is a real, albeit spiritual, kingdom, and one which these people could enjoy then. So he speaks to them about the kingdom of God, and he's curing those who had need of healing. So Jesus, although he and his disciples are in need of rest, has compassion on the people in this first instance, and realizes that he has a circumstance here which will enable him to proclaim the message that he so desires to get to them. All right, any comments or questions on this circumstance? All right, next we come to focus. Oh, what happened here? It's not moving. There we go. The multiplication of food. I'm not sure we'll get, I hate to start this and only get partway through, but that may be how we end up. We'll see. First of all, the preparation, verses 12 through 15. Now the day was ending, and the 12 came to him. I got to stop there. The 12, that seems to be Luke's new favorite term for the inner circle. The 12. He's used that a bunch of times so far. The 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away that they may go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find lodging and get something to eat, for here we are in a desolate place." So the 12 point out that it's necessary that not only that food would be found for all these people, but some place to stay for the night as well. That's a tall order for all these people, as we'll find out later just how many there are. How are you going to do that? I do need to point out that the place where they were is a problem. The location was a problem because there's no food or lodging there. And it provides no solution either, because even the nearby town of Bethsaida would not be large enough, presumably, to accommodate all these people. Let me also point out that for those of you who use King James Version, I think it says there it's a desert place. That it was not a desert place can easily be demonstrated by the fact that the crowd sits in grass, if you look at Matthew's account. So it's desolate in it. No one lives there. Wilderness maybe, but not a desert.
Mine says deserted.
Deserted. That's better. Yeah, it's a deserted place. Although that might indicate so many people did live there, but now they left. I don't know if that was the case or not. Now, looking at what is said here, though, isn't it interesting how the disciples felt that they needed to give advice to the Lord on how he ought to run things? Jesus, we know that you don't realize it's getting late. And Jesus, you don't realize that all these people need something to eat. And Jesus, you don't realize they're also going to need some place to spend the night. So we're here to advise you that something needs to be done. And we think that's humorous, but don't we sometimes do that too, to God? God, I'm sure you don't realize. I'm sure you don't realize this, but here's what I think needs to be done. I just heard a couple days ago an episode of Ultimately, a podcast put out by Ligonier Ministries, Words of Wisdom from R.C. Sproul. I played it for Beth on her way in today, and it was the subject was, does prayer change things? And he's kind of talking about this, how we get into a mindset of thinking that, what would God do without us? Of thinking that either he doesn't know everything because we have to inform him, or thinking that his plan may not be so good. We need to advise him on a better plan. And when he hears our plan, then he changes his mind and decides to do things the way we advise. Or has he planned out everything and he uses all the circumstances, including prayer, as a part of the means by which he accomplishes his plan? So I recommend that podcast. If you listen to podcasts, look up Ultimately, and then if you can look up the one on does prayer change
It
things?
was for short.
Pardon me?
It was short.
Yeah, they're only like 5 minutes long. But here they are. They're telling Jesus what he ought to do. Now, as we consider Jesus's mindset here and the mindset of the disciples, we see that they have one thing in common, and that is there's compassion for the people, as we're going to see for Jesus. And the disciples, surely, and maybe even as a result of their wandering around preaching and healing, have a compassion for the people and desire that they be fed and lodged. But along with the presence of compassion, they also have a lack of faith. And this was addressed in the 17th century by William Burkitt, who was a biblical expositor and vicar in Dedham, Essex, England. He said this: "Here was a strong charity, but a weak faith. A strong charity in desiring the people's relief, but a weak faith in supposing that they could no other way be relieved but by sending them away. Forgetting that Christ, who had healed the multitude miraculously, could also feed them miraculously whenever he pleased, all things being equally easy to an almighty power." Verse 13. But Jesus said to them, "You give them something to eat." What? And the you in the Greek is in an emphatic position. So it's just like I said, you give them something to eat.
Looks like he yelled it.
Like he yelled at.
It's all in capitals, like.
Oh. Yeah. Maybe it was. So why does Jesus say this? Why does Jesus say you give them something to eat?
Their faith wasn't strong, I suppose. They, instead of knowing who they were with, they're with Jesus. And they're saying, well, we got to do something, send them away, da, da, da. So he's saying, okay, you don't have faith in me, well, then you do it.
Okay, so you take care of it. You don't think I can? You take care of it. And I think it might also be to point out to them their inability.
It just made me think of that, God never gives us more than we can handle. That false,
Yeah.
Thing people say, this is
Yeah.
Jesus telling them
Yeah.
directly,
Yeah.
I am commanding you to do more than you are able to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being the woman there and like, although there wasn't, they were the 12, but like, I was just like, ah. What
Well,
do I do?
and I think that's the response that he wants.
Mhm.
And is it any different than sending them out on a mission for which he had empowered them?
Mhm.
So what does he want them to realize now? They need his enablement. They can't do it. They're unable to do it. They need to look to him. So what do they say? Well, they're going to try. And they said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, these are barley loaves. They're not a big loaf of bread like we think of, not an Italian piece of bread. These are little barley loaves, like little cakes almost. And the fish are those little fish. So more like a snack. It's like crackers and anchovies. It's kind of like what it was. That's all I've got. But they have another solution. Unless, and we don't really want to do this, but unless perhaps we go and buy food for all these people, why would that not be a good solution?
Because
expensive
Judas
and there's
held the
nowhere to
purse.
What? If Judas held the
Judas held the
purse,
purse.
there may not be much in it.
It was all for him.
So they couldn't afford to do that.
If it's desolate, there's nowhere to go buy it.
Yeah, where would they go? Into Bethsaida? Would there be enough food there to even buy?
And the food trucks.
No food trucks? Yeah, wouldn't that be something? Food trucks following Jesus around.
It actually reminds me of Moses when he was told to speak and how he was like, well, what about Aaron? So how the disciples were like, well, we can't do this.
Hmm.
So God does tell us to do stuff and then he provides ways when we do have the faith. And I think
Yeah.
that's a good lesson.
That's a good point. In fact, we could go through a lot of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and find lots of people that resisted doing what God said because they said they weren't able. You think of somebody else? Jonah wasn't so much not able as not willing.
Not really,
But yeah. God made him willing. What are you thinking of?
Oh,
No.
building the ark, I'm sure he was like,
Oh, okay, nothing we have specifically, but
but I'm sure
maybe that seemed daunting.
Burning book.
It's
That's kind of what,
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Solomon and some of those great prayers he has about his dedication to the temple and all that is just praise of
mhm.
we're unworthy people, I'm an
Yeah.
unworthy person, all of that.
Yeah, recognizing that God is the one who provided. I think of Gideon. Remember, what's Gideon doing when the angel of the Lord appears to him? He's threshing wheat in a wine press. Not normally where you thresh wheat. You thresh wheat out in the open where the wind can catch the chaff. Why is he in a wine press? He's hiding. He's hiding from the Midianites. And what is the greeting that the angel of the Lord gives him?
Not be afraid. Or something like that, fear not.
Mighty man of valor.
Yeah, something, a great mighty warrior, mighty man of valor. Is that what he was? And when he's told what he's going to do, he said, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. Let's go do it." No, he's reluctant. Gathers up a lot of men. Lord keeps telling him, "You got too many. You got too many," and the rest. And so this happens frequently, and where God has to break a person before he uses them, because they have to know that their strength comes from him. Maybe you've experienced that. I hope you have. And here he's teaching the disciples something. He's demonstrating to them that they do not have the means by which to accomplish what needs to be done. But again, the disciples fail this test of reliance upon Jesus instead of themselves, and try to think of ways that they can accomplish this task. And then the next verse tells us the enormity of the task. For there were about 5,000 men, and that's besides women and children. We assume that probably women and children traipsed along behind their husbands. So some speculate there could have been 10, 20,000 individuals there. But even 5,000 is a daunting number. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Have them sit down to eat in groups of about 50 each." Now, really, he didn't say sit down. He said recline. So they weren't sitting cross-legged. You know, like you think of, they sat the way they always sat at mealtime, and that is reclined. So he said, have them recline. And maybe you've done that. Maybe you went on a picnic sometime out in a field and you kind of reclined on the blanket as you're eating. And he has them do it in groups of about 50 groups. They were used to, if they were in large numbers of people, sitting in groups. Groups were table companies. That was something that was normal, sitting in groups of about 50 each. It enabled them to have a little bit of control, a little order over things, have space between groups so you could walk between them. And the number 50, it seems to be a good number. In fact, it was a number that was used back in First Kings when Jezebel was around, and Jezebel was trying to destroy the prophets of God. And this guy named Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. So it not only shows good organization, but it kind of copies what was done in the time of Elijah. And we've seen a number of things in Luke's gospel that seem to mimic the times of Elijah and Elisha. And maybe this is another one of those. I wouldn't say for certain. Verse 15, they did so and had them all recline. Then we come to the repast. Verse 16, then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Now, you might wonder why 5 loaves and 2 fish. Is there any significance? And, Luke could have just said some loaves and some fish, but he does give us a number. And it may have significance. The word 5 is the number of covenant. Pastor Peter Pett says this. This helps to bring out that this was to be a covenant meal, and that they were to learn that in the covenant they had sufficient provision for all their need, as well as the 5 indicating covenant. The combination of 5 and 2, making 7, indicated sufficiency of divine provision. These would then be supplied to 5,000 men in groups of 50, indicating a covenant community divided up in covenant fashion. So I'm not sure I would push that too far, but I think it's likely that that is something that was significant to them, that they understood that they were in covenant communities there, receiving from the 5 and the 2. The next thing that Jesus does is he looks up to heaven. Looking up to heaven, what does this mean? Why does Jesus do this?
He's talking to God because his father.
Yeah, and he's recognizing that even the loaves and the fish he has, and particularly the loaves and fish that are going to be distributed, are from God the Father. And then it says, he blessed.
Also the
Yeah.
Our common way of prayer
Oh, yeah.
is to bow our heads, to fold our hands and bow our heads. The common Jewish way of prayer is to hold your hands up and to look up. And so that was their main, way of doing prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I like. I like that, because then I'm talking to God. I'm not talking to my shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And then says he blessed them. And them referring to the food, I believe. There can be little doubt, someone has said, therefore, that the words which Jesus spake, whether in Aramaic, Greek, or Hebrew, were those that were so well known, because there was a common blessing given to food. And it was this: blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the world, who causes to come forth bread from the earth. So that was and bread was the natural food that they had. Breaking bread became synonymous with eating, even if there was no bread, because bread was usually there. Yeah.
Where do you find that prayer? Where's that?
Well, Edersheim, in his book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, I think Lightfoot also cites that other people,
But it's not,
It could be online.
Hmm?
Probably be online somewhere else.
yeah, I mean, you can find that in a number of places.
it's not in.
It's not in the
Bible
text
itself.
here. It's, yeah. And then it says he broke them. Now, I'm used to the idea of breaking bread because they didn't have sliced bread. Hence the term we have, better than sliced bread, because there was a time when bread wasn't sliced. But I'm not sure how you break the fish. I'm not sure. If you actually, or breaking just indicates separating them. I'm not sure how that works, but as he broke it, as he separated, let's say, even the bread and the fish, it just kept coming. It kept multiplying. It says, and kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. So as he broke the bread, handed out, he keeps breaking and breaking. I mean, it's hard to even visualize what that would have looked like. Except you just kept handing it out. And they kept distributing. All right, any comments to this point? See, we're a little bit over.
You know, I was just thinking spatially, when we think of miracles, we sometimes like to contain them in nice little packages. Well, this room, many times this room is set up for 50 people. That would be, he fed 100 of these rooms of people.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
with 2 little fish, and now all of a sudden you start getting the scope of this miracle. You know, it's like apple.
Yeah, it's beyond our imagination, really. All right, next time we'll continue. We'll look at a couple other things concerning this great miracle. And proceed from there.
I should mention real quick that young couple that came in, we actually had a missionary that was gonna speak today from Poland. Sean Reimer, he's heading out to Zambia. He was heading out in January, but now he's not heading out till March. And he's a doctor at St. E's, and he's going to be a doctor in Zambia. And he was born and raised there. Gonna go work in the hospital he was born at. But they came because we originally had scheduled him for today. Sean Reimer to come today, because he was leaving in January, but then we rescheduled it because he's not leaving till March now. And they asked me about it on voting day, they were here.
Oh.
So the news didn't get to them, and they're regular members and attenders at Evangel Baptist. So the reason they left was to go back to their church for this Sunday because what they came here for wasn't here, if that makes sense.
Oh, I didn't understand. I thought they were saying they were coming with a friend, and I thought this Dr. Reimer was a friend. And I
Yeah,
said, oh.
he is their friend. He works,
is,
Mike
yeah.
works at the hospital with Sean.
Okay,
And
now
so,
I understand.
yeah,
I
Feel
felt
free,
like
if
I
any of you
was
would like
really
to read one of the Advent readings, make sure you let me know.
You need me?
Yeah, it's probably not.
Yes. No one got today.
No. They ate it on the way.
well, yeah.
And he didn't eat, or his grandma gave him two. Yeah.
They must have now.
I know. They
But,
ate it on the way.
That's what we do. Somebody don't show up. Oh. Yeah, we was in Charlottesville last week. So,
Okay, I'll go.
like showing up yesterday.
Yeah, there is.
Great.
We have kids on. Individual.
And do they have a person to work with? them?
It depends what the long they have an age. If they have. They.
Call out the day before. Anyway.
So that's why they're not reading.
That's not the tone I heard of it.
Same.
Your first time we were here all day. Bless him, correct.
He needs to.
Well, sometimes the kids are so bad that we can't just eat that.
Oh, it's on Marcia's phone.
It wasn't.
I brought it up today.
It wasn't.
Lights. And it's actually
I
nice
got it.
and game
Side They started.
It's actually a brick. Okay, game.
How would I
You
have
ever,
heard
you
that?
know, Gills?
No, I don't. Wonder if Katie was talking about.
Katie.
Katie was talking about that, Katie Meese.
It's letting him just not
She
even-
doesn't, she.
Wait, you know, the problem is.
Yeah. It's just out, like,
It's too much, you know, like,
That's a
one
nice
of our
thing.
teachers, something like
So,
this thing.
I guess I'm
Now
not English.
They're
So my
right.
parents, my grandparents
They
say
say
that.
no,
They hold
he needs to
everybody
get a
back.
whole special
So
class.
it's stuck in here.
His aide would have to talk to him all day.
Or at least those-
Because you can't do that.
Right.
I heard you're coming to my house.
I think so.
Okay.
There are kids.
Why don't you home
who
cook
have,
it?
like,
I think he was home preparing, but she's coming through.
you know,
Okay,
He's supposed to have everything all ready.
they need to
okay, so we know the blame.
Do that.
We could do it
The
in
only
mass.
place to
Exactly.
Not
Okay.
all day.
Okay, that's why I
Not very
wondered.
often.
I said, well, I would think
But
they'd
there-
have to have something.
We do.
Yeah, because that today, you just can't get away with that.
So you can
Now
follow
you-
us.
Gills.
Yeah. Yeah, Marcia, that's good sense of direction. I would.
And I think it's- And I'm not really big on that.
I'm not either.
I think it's just-
Probably is here.
I wondered, I said, well, maybe he has a different way of learning. He needed.
Well, like this little boy who can't write it, that when he go to write, he just goes, and then scribbles. He needed to go, he goes to now to. Are you down? All our kids with issues, so he's, they're teaching them computer too old to work out.
Yeah, he just need a different
Some
approach.
I think it's somebody who's heard about it.
Maybe, I don't know.
But there are kids who can't, I know, I looked at, I worked with. Like the Lowe's, she could really been there, he gets pulled out a lot of press for help and stuff. But she's just.
Yeah. Hey, it's just-
Because I worked in. Yeah, somewhere. But if they're two guys, they would.
Yeah, that's. it.
Yeah. Nice family. A lot of property. Maybe you have to work with working with his agent. Just walk out of class, you actually wear this one, you home and do an online school.
Yeah,
That's what this person.
that's what, yeah.
So that, it's those kind of things happening.
There's a kid at Beaver Local, a friend of ours, their grandson is in this class, and this kid's violent. And he bites, the teacher has to wear sleeves, the kid, but with the public school, they don't have any choice.
Right, and you know, another one we can't, because it disrupts the class so much. It's not fair.
She's trying to pull him out of that classroom, but they won't let, I know I went through that. Once they're in that class, they won't let you move in, because if they let you, then everyone else is gonna want you.
My daughter's. Oh,
Wow, high school.
These are.
Oh, if it could be, that'd be
They
much
have parents
harder.
in jail, and parents around.
Ah,
Kids who, one kid they had to call it, first we had 95 and we had those are kids who are
yeah. Well, that's all, and I told her, I don't know what option you have, except to pull your child out of that school